Bom dia a todas e todos. Tá dando. Sim. Bom dia pela terceira vez. Bom dia a todas e todos. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon in Amsterdam. We're very happy to carry out the first panel of our International Week. This is an event that has been planned for a while, and we have a partnership between the Provost of Graduate Studies, Professor Werner here, the Office of International Relations, and also the Provost of Research at UFSC. And this panel is called Current Panorama of Internationalization of Higher Education, Panorama Atual da Internacionalização da Educação Superior. This activity will be conducted in English and Spanish. Julieta Aba, one of our guests, will talk in Spanish. Professor Hans from Amsterdam will speak in English, and also André Brasil will speak in English. I would like to welcome everyone here. And this panel is so important because we are trying to discuss the very essence of internationalization in higher education. Internationalization is not a recent phenomenon, yet it has never been so present on discourses, official discourses, on institutional documents, on national and institutional strategies. So, of course, there's need to discuss this. And we have here three very distinguished scholars. The first one, he wouldn't need any introduction, but I'll introduce him anyways. He's Professor Hans de Wit. He's a distinguished fellow of the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College, United States. And he's also an emeritus professor of the Practice in International Higher Education at the Department of Educational Leadership and Higher Education of the Lynch School of Education and Human Development in Boston College. From 2015 to 2020, he was a full director of CIAG. He's an IAU Senior Fellow by the International Association of Universities. He's co-editor of the journal Policy Reviews in Higher Education and the founding editor of the Journal of Studies in International Education. He's also co-editor of the International Higher Education and co-editor book series Global Perspectives in Higher Education. He has published over the decade of 2010-2020 a monthly blog in University World News on internationalization of higher education. He has written and co-written many other books and articles on international higher education, and he's actively involved in assessment and consultancy in international education for organizations like the European Commission, UNESCO, the World Bank, the OECD, IAU, European Parliament, the Council of Europe, European Consortium for Accreditation, among others. Hans de Wit is also the founding member and past president of the European Association for International Education. He has been the director of the Center for International Education Internationalization at the Università Cattolica Sacro Cuore in Milan, Italy, and professor of internationalization of higher education in Amsterdam, University of Applied Sciences. I could stay here for 3 more hours, and it wouldn't be enough. Professor Hans de Wit is definitely one of the most important researchers on international higher education, and we're very lucky to have him. So, Hans, thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Fernanda, and it's a great pleasure to join you in this panel. And sorry for not being able to be there in person, but as you can imagine, it is not. I don't want to travel too much in this situation of climate change for short presentations, but maybe in the future I will be happy to visit Brazil again and being active, meeting my friends and colleagues at OCD and to other places as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now introduce Professor Maria Julieta Aba, and I'll do this in Portuguese. Maria Julieta Aba é doutora em Educação no Programa de Pós-Graduação em Educação da Universidade do Vale do Rio dos Sinos. Ela possui mestrado em Políticas e Administração da Educação pela Universidade Nacional de 3 de Fevereiro, e graduação no curso Licenciatura em Relações Internacionais pela Universidade Nacional del Centro de la Província de Buenos Aires. Realizou estágio de pós-doutorado em Educação na Unicinos, com bolsa DocFix da CAPES. É professora e pesquisadora do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Educação da Unicinos, na linha de pesquisa História, Políticas e Gestão da Educação. Atua também na graduação, nos cursos de Relações Internacionais e Pedagogia. É responsável pelo Centro de Estudos Internacionais e Educação, da Unicinos, e vice-coordenadora da Cátedra Unesco Educação em Cidadania Global e Justiça Socioambiental. Bem-vinda, Julieta. Nosso terceiro painelista, André Brasil. Ele é pesquisador no Center for Science and Technology Studies, da Universidade de Leiden, e servidor da Coordenação de Aperfeiçoamento de Pessoal de Nível Superior, onde desenvolve, desde Leiden, estudos e pesquisas sobre avaliação. Suas áreas de interesse incluem o aprimoramento de sistemas de avaliação, ciência aberta e promoção da diversidade na ciência, com especial ênfase no multilinguismo e na inclusão geográfica. Ele é membro da Cátedra Unesco de Diversidade e Inclusão na Ciência Global. E André também integra o Research on Research Institute, sediado no Reino Unido, e é professor visitante do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Ciência Política da Universidade Federal do Paraná. Ele possui uma formação acadêmica multidisciplinar, com PhD em Avaliação de Pesquisa e Cienciometria pelo CWTS, mestrado em Políticas Públicas e Desenvolvimento pelo Instituto de Pesquisa Econômica Aplicada, IPEA, além de especializações em Inteligência Estratégica e Docência no Ensino Superior e graduações em Marketing e Letras. So we're very, very lucky to have these three scholars with such an important way that they have done. And now we start with Professor Hans, who will have around 15 to 20 minutes. Then we'll hear Julieta and then André, and then we will open up for the public for questions and reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernanda, and again, thank you for inviting me to this important panel. Talking about internationalization of higher education in the current climate that we are living in is not an easy one. As Fernanda said, internationalization is not a recent phenomenon. It's already there for a very long time, in the sense that universities always had some form of international collaboration and exchange, but it became as a concept and a strategy only really on the agenda of higher education in the early 1990s, as a result of the increasing globalization of our societies and economies, and the response that universities had to react to that and become an important actor of that. And it was also stimulated by the initiatives of the European Commission to create programs like Horizon for Research and Erasmus for cooperation, not only within the European Union, but also with the outside world to connect internationally. So in the early 1990s, it was really a period of hope, and internationalization was seen as a driving force, not only for collaboration, but also for competition. Collaboration in the sense that we had to collaborate in research, we had to exchange students, we had to exchange faculty, and that did drive a lot of initiatives around the world to open up to the international environment. Institutions of higher education started to develop policies for this activity, and we now know that, based on the global surveys that we do with the International Association of Universities, that something like 2/3 of institutions of higher education around the world have currently a strategy for internationalization, and even 1/5 of them have also incorporated internationalization as part of the overall strategy, which is very important because you cannot see internationalization as an isolated factor. But so we saw a very great hope, and organizations like the World Bank, the OECD, UNESCO also paid a lot of attention to the importance of internationalization. And in those early 1990s, I was very much involved with my colleague Jay Knight from Canada in discussing and debating and writing about what do we mean with internationalization and why is internationalization so important and what kind of programmatic and organizational strategy we have to drive the internationalization of higher education around the world. It was, again, a period of hope and enthusiasm, very broadly driven by basically bottom-up by institutions and by officers of international relations that said, well, it's important to do this. At the same time, we also have seen that increasingly the collaborative factor has been exchanged for the competition factor. In particular, in the global north, universities were starting to see internationalization as a competitive force. We compete for the best international students. We compete for the best international talents among faculty. We compete for access to top positions in the rankings. We compete for access to top publications in journals. All that competitive environment shifted basically the focus from collaboration and exchange to competition. And although there still has also been continuing efforts to stimulate collaboration as well, the competitive dimension became very important. Even to the extent that countries like Australia and the UK were so much depending their survival as higher education institutions on revenue of international students, that at the moment that is going to be cut, and we see initiatives by the governments of those countries to do so, and also by the increasing competition from other countries, in particular from the global south, that these higher education institutions now are in big financial problem. So the competitive factor was there, but it had also a negative impact on what we can do in higher education internationalization. And of course, we have seen a counter reaction to that development as well. We have seen first in Europe, the Internationalization at Home initiative from colleagues from Malmö in Sweden who said, well, we now are having 5% students from our university who go abroad and something similar in our institution. But what about the other 95% of our students that are not mobile? Can we not create much more of a policy as well to create skills and competencies and learning outcomes that are international, intercultural for those 95 students, so for all students in essence? And that movement resonated very much around the world, not only Europe, but I think in particular in the global south, because in the global south, it was not 5%, it was at that time roughly 1%, now not much more than 2%. And in Africa, it's 0.5% of students and faculty that have a possibility to go abroad. So it had become a kind of reaction to this competitive environment. And also we saw, in particular in the UK and Australia, and later on in the rest of the world, also a reaction, well, okay, we have those international students, but what do they learn? And what do our own students who not go abroad? Because from Australia, the mobility outside was also very poor in the UK as well. So how can we create a curriculum that is much more focused on the content being international, the assessment being international, the learning outcomes being international, and the way we teach become much more international. So the internationalization of the curriculum, which my colleague Betty Lisk has been writing about, and also that movement has resonated very much in the rest of the world, and in particular, again, in the global south and also in Brazil. And many colleagues, scholars there are writing about it. So the counter reaction was there, also comprehensive internationalization in the United States, you can see in that perspective. And people started to say, well, yeah, how can we change this paradigm from a competitive paradigm to going back to a collaborative paradigm? At the same time, there was this feeling that internationalization was considered too much as a Western paradigm, a dominant factor that redefined in the global north what internationalization meant, without taking into account the needs and the priorities and the opportunities that the global south had. So how can we react to that? And also, how can we make the other two missions of internationalization, besides education, research, and service to society, more international. So you saw this whole movement also of internationalization of higher education for society, and internationalization of research, curriculum development becoming a kind of counter-reaction, and the decolonization of higher education as well. In 2015, that resulted already in a reaction that we said, well, we have to update the definition of J. Knight, which was quite commonly used, and who said that it's a process of integrating an international, intercultural, and global dimension in the purpose, functions, and delivery of post-secondary education, to say, well, that's a nice working definition, but it doesn't say anything about where do we need to go, what is important with internationalization. And we said it has to be not only a process, but it has to be an intentional process, because the different actors in higher education have to have the intention to make internationalization work. And it has to make it work to improve the quality of our research, to improve the quality of our education, to not do it for a small elite of 2% of the students and faculty, but for all students and staff, and to make a meaningful contribution to society. That was a big step forward in the conceptual thinking about what we mean with internationalization. And you see that resonating, and you see also people putting emphasis more on it. For instance, in the context of what our dear friend and colleague Luciano Staliviero wrote about responsible internationalization. We have to make internationalization much more responsible, in the sense that we have to serve our students, we have to serve our staff, but we also have to serve our societies. And that again, very much aligned with the definition I mentioned before from 2015, but also make clear that there was a kind of different approach than the competitive approach that we had. So that sounded all positive, although the reality is that these kind of new developments reacting against this competitive environment was much more resonating in paper, in documents, and in nice declarations than in actions. We still see that the actions to make internationalization responsible for serving society and for all students and staff is still not really implemented. And that's a big challenge that we have. So that's one crucial thing to keep in mind. The second one is that in the current climate, we see a counter-reaction which is much more negative to this competitive environment. We see that in particular in the global north, countries like my own country, the Netherlands, like Canada, Australia, the UK, in Scandinavia, we see that institutions and governments are saying, well, we should stop international collaboration, or at least limit drastically international collaboration. We should stop to teach in English. We should stop to receive international students, because that has become too much a concern for the society in all kinds of different ways. It is in particular a nationalist, populist, right-wing movement, but at the same time, it also resonated very well with the concerns that people had that we had done over the top in making us ourselves so dependent on revenue for international students, and then the issue of national security. There's a lot of concern in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, in Canada, that international collaboration, in particular in research, can be misused by our partners. And so you see a kind of different approach that says, well, we should limit, we should not make international collaboration the driving force. Of course, we are open for it, but we have to be very careful that it is not going to be misused. And so you see a shift in the sense of the term responsible internationalization as used by Luciano Staliviero and others, and even was part of the Swedish policy government, to using responsible internationalization as a restricting term to internationalization, saying we have to be open as possible, but to be close as necessary, as a document by the European Commission says. So we see a counter-reaction that is negatively impacting our strive to international collaboration and exchange. And we have to be careful for that because the context is not very open, where at the same time, we know that international collaboration is essential for saving our planet, for climate change, and for poverty to address health issues, all the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. So that means that we, as actors, as scholars, as administrators, as faculty, and university leaders, have to think about how can we stop this reverse negative reaction to international collaboration? How can we do that in an autonomous and academic-free way, and to make internationalization serving indeed the needs of our society locally and internationally? And that is what we have to do as a reaction to this, both the competitive way of looking at internationalization and the national interest way of looking at internationalization for the future. And in that, I think both the Global South can play a very important role, so ook institutions in Brazil, to counter-reverse that tendency, to create its own internationalization strategy based on its own context, its own priorities and its own needs, and using also at the same time new possibilities that technology creates to make collaboration still possible in this very complicated environment we live in. With that as an introductory remark, I close and look forward to the discussion further on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans, for bringing us this very important overview and also historical perspective of internationalization. I believe your words open the floor for many questions here, and I will now give the word to Julieta Aba.
Muito obrigada. Bom dia a todos e todas. Eu vou falar em espanhol, né? Vou honrar o nosso plurilinguismo e também aqui na nossa primeira Semana Internacional da UFSC. Então, eu fiz a minha apresentação em português, mas eu vou falar em espanhol. Me gustaría agradecer a la Prorrectoría de Pesquisa, Prorrectoría de Posgraduación, a las Intersecretaría de Relaciones Internacionales de la Universidad Federal de Santa Catarina y, bueno, saludar a todos los presentes aquí y también parabenizar. Creo que esa es una palabra muy linda en portugués, por el evento, por tener esta iniciativa de realizar la primera Semana Internacional y que nos convoca a reflexionar desde la teoría y desde la práctica la internacionalización de la educación superior. Y eso es lo que voy a intentar realizar en mis 15 minutos que tengo. También me gustaría saludar a los panelistas, el profesor Hans de Witt, André Brasil y a nuestra querida colega y amiga Fernanda Leal por la invitación y también por montar este panel y traernos varios interrogantes para pensar la internacionalización. Como Fernanda comentó, leyó acerca de mi currículum académico y voy a traer algunos elementos también para que contribuyan para conocer mi lugar de fala, ¿no? Que también es una traducción bastante difícil de hacer para el español. Sería mi lugar de enunciación, desde donde me estoy posicionando para realizar mi palestra y mi ponencia. ¿Cómo pensé organizar estos 15 minutos? Primero, traer algunas ideas sobre el diagnóstico de la internacionalización de la educación superior, específicamente en América Latina. Después, en un segundo momento, traer una provocación que después me gustaría en el momento de preguntas y de diálogo que podamos conversar al respecto, que es la idea de por una otra internacionalización, dialogando con Milton Santos. Milton Santos, nuestro bueno, yo digo que es nuestro, ¿no? Milton Santos de América Latina, pero es de aquí de Brasil, geógrafo brasilero, entonces para conversar, hacer esa interlocución con él para pensar una otra internacionalización y comentar con ustedes algunas experiencias de investigación que vengo realizando desde la universidad donde doy clases, que es la Universidad do Vale do Rio dos Sinos, que queda en San Leopoldo, cerca de Porto Alegre, en Río Grande do Sul. Entonces, como comentaba, el primer punto de partida, como antesala, Fernanda estaba leyendo mi currículum académico profesional y me pareció interesante también comentar mi lugar de enunciación, desde donde yo me estoy posicionando para decir lo que digo. Soy mujer, soy madre, Manuela es mi hija brasilera, que está allí atrás precisamente, ¿no? Con mi compañero también brasilero. Además de eso, soy migrante, soy argentina, soy una argentina que vive en Brasil. Ayer en la conferencia de abertura comentaban, el profesor Rui Opperman comentaba del programa PEC-PG, y después de su palestra comenté con él, bueno, yo soy hija del PEC-PG, realicé mi doctorado integral aquí en Brasil con una beca del PEC-PG y me puso muy contenta que va a retornar y que va a volver ese programa. Estamos muy ansiosos esperando por la vuelta de ese programa. Y bueno, soy hija de ese programa. Y luego me quedé aquí en Brasil, realicé mi postdoctorado y por eso me considero una mujer migrante. Soy profesora, pesquisadora, doy clases en el grado, en el posgrado. Soy internacionalista de formación, pero también soy internacionalista en la práctica. Hace unos días reflexionaba, mi coordinador del programa de posgrado me preguntaba, bueno, ¿cómo te identificas en términos de investigación? Y sí, en términos de investigación, investigo la internacionalización de la educación, pero también hago internacionalización. Y entonces me considero una militante del tema de la internacionalización. Militante, activista, en fin. Y soy latinoamericana. Y también ayer me sentí muy provocada cuando el profesor Rui Opperman comentaba, bueno, ¿quién viene acá a Brasil a estudiar? ¿Quién elige Brasil como destino para realizar sus estancias de investigación, sus estancias de intercambio? Y recuerdo cuando tomé la decisión de venir aquí a Brasil por la primera vez, nunca había pisado suelo brasilero, varios colegas argentinos me cuestionaron diciendo, bueno, ¿por qué a Brasil y no para Europa? ¿Por qué a Brasil y no para Estados Unidos? Y creo que tiene que ver con cómo nos identificamos también como latinoamericanos. Nunca entendí una diferenciación entre Brasil y América Latina. Siempre comprendí que somos todos uno. Y también ayer conversando con el profesor Rui Opperman, también recordaba cómo a partir de mis viajes por América Latina siempre sentía que teníamos una unidad, algo en común que tal vez sea muy difícil de explicar o de colocar en palabras, pero uno cuando está en Perú, en Cuba, en Brasil, en Argentina, en Colombia, a lo largo y ancho de toda nuestra América Latina, sentir que tenemos algo en común, y yo creo que eso que tenemos algo en común de nuestra América Latina, Abya Yala, Pindorama, como nuestros pueblos originarios llamaron inicialmente a nuestro territorio, tenemos una historia en común, ¿no? Una historia de colonización, una historia de opresión, una historia que nos fue marcando, y eso nadie nos lo puede quitar, y eso es algo que nos acompaña y nos va a acompañar siempre. Al mismo tiempo somos una región muy diversa, somos una región que tiene una heterogeneidad muy grande, heterogeneidad geográfica, heterogeneidad en cuanto a nuestra propia composición cultural. Y un sociólogo peruano que infelizmente nos dejó, Aníbal Quijano, comentaba que América Latina es el primer lugar tiempo de luchas y de resistencias. Entonces, también compartimos eso y eso es algo que me caracteriza también en cuanto latinoamericana. El tercer punto de partida, y ya voy para los diagnósticos, me gustaría también que la persona que nos está asistiendo por internet y aquí también quien está presente pueda comprender que ese mi lugar de enunciación, mi lugar de fala, también tiene que ver con un posicionamiento teórico epistemológico del tema de la internacionalización, ¿no? La internacionalización que vengo investigando, trabajando y que también realizo en la práctica, la entiendo como un proceso y como un fenómeno que es político, ¿no? La internacionalización, ya varios autores vienen afirmando eso, la internacionalización no es un proceso neutro, no carece de intencionalidad, es un proceso que sí, que tiene intencionalidad, entonces es político, es social. Recién Hans de Witt nos hablaba de ese concepto de internacionalización para la sociedad, ¿no? Entonces la internacionalización también tiene un cuño fuertemente social. También entiendo que la internacionalización es un proceso histórico. Fernanda, Hans de Witt también nos comentaban eso. La internacionalización no comienza hoy, no comenzó ayer tampoco. Ya es un proceso que viene manifestándose ya a siglos. Y cuando hablamos de siglos también me refiero a diversidad también de ese surgimiento, no solo en Europa con sus universidades, sino también aquí en América Latina. El surgimiento de la internacionalización también fue acompañando nuestra propia educación superior y venimos trabajando dentro del programa de posgrado donde actúo en la internacionalización de las fuentes de la pedagogía latinoamericana. Finalmente, la internacionalización como proceso pedagógico. Comprender que la internacionalización para estudiantes, profesores, gestores, tiene mucho para enseñarnos, aprendemos mucho con la internacionalización. Hablábamos de interculturalidad, ayer de reciprocidad también, entonces la internacionalización como proceso pedagógico. El diagnóstico, que voy a traer dos movimientos de diagnóstico. El primero en cuanto a acciones de internacionalización y el segundo de investigación, y fue bueno que mi presentación está en el medio, porque después entiendo que André va a traer algunos elementos para pensar en esa geopolítica de la producción del conocimiento, y en este caso voy a hablar sobre la producción de conocimiento de internacionalización. Según un informe de la UNESCO que fue publicado bien en el inicio de la pandemia, ese informe del Instituto de Educación Superior para América Latina de la UNESCO, el IESALC, nos colocaba que la educación superior, el acceso a la educación superior creció en las últimas décadas de 19% a 38%, y que también, como correlato de esto, las acciones de internacionalización también crecieron en sus diferentes modalidades. Y aquí citan, ¿no?, algunas de las modalidades de internacionalización, esas acciones que también crecieron junto con el acceso a la educación superior. No voy a leer cada una de ellas, pero nosotros vivimos esas acciones, ¿no? El crecimiento de redes de investigación, redes de colaboración, el crecimiento también de programas que tienen que ver con la virtualidad, etcétera, etcétera. Sin embargo, el informe muestra también que mismo que haya existido ese crecimiento, todavía es limitado para un determinado grupo de estudiantes de clase media alta, ¿no? Y aquí tenemos una exclusión de los estudiantes de baja renta, tenemos una exclusión de los estudiantes de grupos étnicos que son marginalizados y que todavía siguen enfrentando desafíos para accesar a la educación superior. Eso nos dice el informe publicado en 2020. Y entonces, si ese acceso a la educación superior está todavía limitado, crecimos pero todavía está limitado, entonces también, por ende, la internacionalización sigue siendo reducida para un determinado para un determinado porcentaje de la sociedad. Y dentro de ese porcentaje de exclusión, vamos a tener otro problema, que es que las acciones de internacionalización todavía siguen siendo muy limitadas para la movilidad internacional. Consideramos movilidad física, internacional, académica como sinónimo de internacionalización y sigue siendo la gran actividad, ¿no? La gran vedette dentro del proceso de internacionalización. Aquí traje algunos datos del Instituto de Estadísticas de la UNESCO antes de la pandemia, porque sabemos que después de la pandemia estos números cambiaron un poco, pero bueno, aquí si podemos traer algunos números hasta el 2024, ya tenemos un número más expresivo, cerca de 6 millones de estudiantes que se movilizan internacionalmente, que atraviesan las fronteras, y tenemos también una grande desigualdad, ¿no? Como está representada acá, de cuál es ¿qué eligen esos estudiantes? ¿Cuál es el país de destino que eligen aquellos estudiantes? Y aquí ustedes van a ver por región, y aquí aparece de forma muy evidente que las principales regiones elegidas por estos estudiantes son Europa Occidental y América del Norte. Nada de esto resulta una novedad, también estuvimos conversando sobre eso. El profesor Rui Opperman trajo algunos de estos datos que también aparecían en la CAPES, ¿no? en las estadísticas de la CAPES. Y aquí voy a unir el primer diagnóstico con el segundo diagnóstico, que tiene que ver con la producción de conocimiento sobre internacionalización. ¿Cómo estamos en términos de investigación? Algunos autores van a argumentar que existen algunas tendencias, inclusive que estas tendencias también se manifiestan en otras áreas de investigación, no solo en internacionalización. Desde los últimos 20, 25 años tenemos un gran aumento de las publicaciones sobre el tema, y eso es algo que para quien investiga sobre internacionalización viene siendo muy evidente el aumento de investigaciones. Hay más profesores y profesoras que investigan sobre el tema. También que tenemos un gran aumento de grupos y redes de investigación sobre el tema. Tenemos una gran diversidad de perfiles, también eso fue evidente en el trabajo de revisión de literatura y revisión bibliográfica, que tenemos desde educación, administración, psicología, economía, etcétera, etcétera. Y que existe una constitución de especialistas en diversos países de América Latina. Especialistas, expertos en el tema, van formándose, constituyéndose y consolidándose expertos en el área de la internacionalización. Y aquí van apareciendo algunos desafíos y algunas problemáticas, y no traigo aquí datos, pero sí a partir de una práctica investigativa que nos viene acompañando ya desde hace un tiempo, y es que nos conocemos poco, ¿no? Y también eso aparecía en los datos. Ayer André y el profesor Rui Opperman también traían eso. Falta de vínculos entre los grupos regionales, nos conocemos poco entre nosotros mismos, conocemos poco de la producción científico-académica que producen nuestros vecinos. Y con nuestros vecinos yo podría referirme tranquilamente a Argentina, Brasil, Paraguay, pero voy a usar un poco más y voy a decir, conocemos poco lo que investigan nuestros colegas bolivianos, nuestros colegas paraguayos, nuestros colegas venezolanos, etcétera, etcétera. Y ahí tenemos una gran dificultad para encontrar el material que esos colegas producen, ¿no? En las bases de datos. Y aquí traje una imagen, ¿no? de esa producción del conocimiento, como si fuese un iceberg, ¿no? donde en la punta del iceberg encontramos a los grupos de expertos que son reconocidos y citados por sus pares latinoamericanos, siendo ellos muy pocos, ¿no? Ese grupo de expertos muy consolidados y muy pocos. Y después, de la punta del iceberg para abajo, una gran cantidad de expertos que son desconocidos y que no son citados por sus pares latinoamericanos, y aquí lentamente vamos produciendo una gran endogenía. Y para intentar traer la práctica de la internacionalización para dentro de mi habla, ¿no? Aquí de mi charla, me gustaría compartir con ustedes dos reflexiones de dos estudiantes que me provocaron en distintos momentos. El primer momento, una de las estudiantes, cuando tomó conocimiento del tema de la internacionalización por primera vez, me hizo el siguiente planteamiento. Profesora, entonces, ¿la internacionalización es un privilegio de quien ya es un privilegiado? ¿No? Esa fue la primera reflexión que me trajo un estudiante del curso de Relaciones Internacionales cuando estábamos trabajando sobre el tema y ella como contacto primero con el tema. La segunda problematización es de una pedagoga que está realizando la maestría en nuestro programa de posgraduación y participó recientemente de una conferencia sobre el tema de internacionalización, donde se comentaba que sí, la movilidad por diversos motivos es difícil porque es más costosa, es difícil, inclusive ahora el profesor Hans de Witt comentaba, bueno, trasladarse en tiempos de crisis climática, moverse, atravesar las fronteras en tiempos de crisis climática es muy difícil. Entonces, bueno, ¿qué opción tenemos? La digitalidad, ¿no? Tenemos nuestros instrumentos, nuestros dispositivos, ¿no? Celular, computadora, mediadas por la internet. Y mi estudiante me preguntó, profesora, ¿y qué sucede cuando los estudiantes no tienen computadora, cuando los estudiantes no tienen internet? ¿Qué sucede en esos contextos? Y me parece que es ahí que surge una inquietación, una problemática que nos lleva a pensar en otra internacionalización, y ese es el punto que me gustaría traer ahora. ¿Por qué otra internacionalización? Porque tal vez la movilidad y la digitalidad no estén incluyendo a todos, ¿no? Si decimos internacionalización para todos y para todas, tal vez no estemos llegando a esos otros que están en una condición socioeconómica baja, ¿no? De renta baja, y qué sucede con esos otros que el sistema no está incluyendo. Y en ese sentido me pareció muy interesante la problemática que trajo mi estudiante, sobre todo porque es una problemática de un estudiante que está trabajando en una escuela de la periferia de Novo Hamburgo y que pensó en compartirla conmigo, le pedí permiso y la estoy compartiendo con ustedes. Entonces, por una otra internacionalización, y aquí es donde traigo a Milton Santos. Milton Santos no va a hablar de internacionalización, va a hablar de globalización, va a proponer otra globalización, y aquí es cuando, en diálogo con él, pensando, bueno, si es otra globalización, si ya en este contexto en el cual estamos viviendo la globalización como proceso nos está impactando negativamente, ¿cómo pensamos también? El profesor Hans de Witt colocaba, bueno, ¿cómo amenizamos esos impactos negativos de la internacionalización? ¿Cómo lidiamos con esos impactos negativos de la internacionalización? Y entonces yo creo que aquí Milton Santos nos va a provocar para pensar en otra internacionalización también como una posibilidad y como ella podría ser. Porque antes de pensar cómo ella podría ser, nosotros estamos viviendo una internacionalización como una fábula, ¿no? Como una fábula, como nos hacen creer que puede ser esa internacionalización a partir de los rankings internacionales, a partir de que todos los estudiantes pueden movilizarse de un lado para otro. Sin embargo, la internacionalización también nos muestra su verdadera cara, ¿no? La internacionalización como una perversidad y como ella realmente es, y por eso pensar en una otra internacionalización creo que hoy es una necesidad, es una gran necesidad. Y ahí traigo algunos horizontes para pensar en esa otra internacionalización, porque como comentaba el profesor Hans de Witt, necesita tener materialidad, necesita materializarse en la propia práctica. No podemos solo escribir nuestros papers, nuestros capítulos y nuestros libros y que eso quede allí. La internacionalización, esa otra internacionalización necesita tener una materialidad, necesita estar en la práctica, necesita ser vivenciada por estudiantes, profesores, etc. Entonces aquí traigo algunas imágenes que me provocan para pensar esa otra internacionalización que tiene que ver sí con una internacionalización que auxilie, que ayude a pensar posibilidades en esta crisis climática que estamos viviendo. Ayer también se comentaba que la crisis climática no es solo, por ejemplo, en Río Grande do Sul, que es el estado donde yo estoy viviendo. Tuvimos inundaciones y nos recomponiendo, estamos intentando salir adelante. Y no es solo de Río Grande do Sul, afecta a varios lugares, es internacional, es global. Entonces, ¿cómo la internacionalización también puede estar ayudándonos en el sentido de la cooperación internacional para que podamos vivir un poco más en este planeta? Pensar en el plurilingüismo. El plurilingüismo hoy es fundamental. En un sentido, bueno, después podemos conversar sobre eso, que tiene que ver con el monolingüismo y el inglés, ¿no? Como lengua general. Es algo que nos interpela, es algo que necesitamos superar, principalmente aquí en América Latina, ¿no? Principalmente aquí en América Latina, donde tenemos un montón de lenguas originarias, tenemos el español, el portugués, el guaraní como lenguas oficiales de nuestros países aquí en el Mercosur, por ejemplo. Entonces, el plurilingüismo. ¿Cómo vamos a tornar esa internacionalización, cuando hablamos de internacionalización comprensiva, integral, responsable, etcétera, y otras adjetivaciones para la internacionalización? ¿Cómo esa internacionalización, por ejemplo, integra, cómo esa internacionalización incluye a esos otros que están aquí, como mi estudiante comentaba, ¿no? Aquellos que no están dentro de la movilidad, aquellos que no están dentro de la digitalidad, esos otros. ¿Cómo la internacionalización va a pensar en esos otros, en esas otras? Y aquí traigo, por ejemplo, los pueblos originarios, ¿no? Los pueblos originarios, migrantes, refugiados, etcétera, etcétera. Y obviamente la internacionalización, si hablamos de crisis climática, también necesitamos hablar de las crisis interreligiosas que nosotros estamos viviendo, intolerancia, discriminación, etcétera, etcétera. Cómo la internacionalización puede promover un diálogo interreligioso y que produzca una transformación real en esa sociedad que es nuestra sociedad y es en la que nosotros vivimos. Para finalizar, compartir una experiencia de investigación, ¿no? Que entiendo también que hace parte de esa materialidad, de esa internacionalización desde la práctica, que realizo desde 2021 en el programa de posgraduación en Unicinos, que es una investigación que fue financiada inicialmente por la FAPERTS, que es la Fundación de Amparo para Pesquisa de Río Grande do Sul, y actualmente tiene financiamiento del CNPq. Y el título de la investigación es Democratización de la internacionalización de la educación, políticas, enfoques y experiencias en el escenario actual. La primer parte del proyecto involucró un trabajo sobre producción del conocimiento de la internacionalización, y ayer en la charla de Andrés, cuando Andrés estaba comentando para nosotros fue muy interesante utilizar el Voice Viewer, Andrés, porque fue mostrando cómo esa producción del conocimiento está concentrada en determinados lugares y entonces nos propusimos, ¿por qué no hacer un acervo digital latinoamericano de producción del conocimiento sobre internacionalización? Ya que nos conocemos poco, ya que tenemos una dificultad para encontrar esa producción del conocimiento de colegas que son nuestros vecinos, ¿por qué no construir ese acervo? Y bueno, realizamos esa tarea con colegas de Argentina, de aquí de Brasil, de Chile, en nuestra red Redalín. Después nos desbruzamos y trabajamos bastante sobre la metodología de sistematización de experiencias, una metodología que es una metodología participativa, que viene de la educación popular y bueno, estuvimos trabajando ese tipo de metodología para sistematizar experiencias. Ya que nos conocemos poco, vamos a reunir, identificar esas experiencias y socializar las experiencias. Hacemos cosas muy buenas en América Latina, hacemos cosas muy interesantes, ayer también se comentaba de eso, ¿no? Nos conocemos poco y ese también es una gran dificultad que tenemos. Nos conocemos poco, no reconocemos, por ende, lo que hacen nuestros colegas y cuando vamos para afuera, para otros lugares, principalmente del norte global, entendemos que es allí donde realmente están las buenas prácticas, cuando tal vez las buenas prácticas estén a nuestro lado. Finalmente, realizamos una contextualización analizando documentos de la CRES de 2018 en Córdoba, que nos encontramos aquí con Fernanda, y bueno, recientemente en la CRES +5 en Brasilia. Finalmente, parte 2 del proyecto que inició en este año, 2024, y bueno, tuvo un inicio un poco conturbado también por cuenta de la crisis climática, de las inundaciones, y entonces aquí tenemos un subproyecto que es el proyecto de sistematización internacional de experiencias educativas indígenas para la interculturalidad y la ciudadanía global crítica, financiado por el CNPq. Entonces, cuando comentaba anteriormente que, por ejemplo, poblaciones indígenas también pueden estar dentro del proceso de internacionalización, ya están dentro del proceso de internacionalización, pero ahora es cómo nosotros también reconocemos, ¿no? Conocemos y reconocemos lo que ellos están haciendo y tiene un valor fundamental para pensar, por ejemplo, la crisis climática. Ellos ya hace mucho tiempo que están planteando cómo vivir y sobrevivir en este planeta. Y bueno, estamos trabajando con 3 poblaciones indígenas, Paraguay, San Paulo y San Leopoldo, en ese sentido de la ciudadanía global y la interculturalidad. También estamos trabajando con las prácticas de internacionalización en la educación básica. La internacionalización, así como comentamos que no es un proceso novedoso, también es un proceso exclusivamente de la universidad. Nosotros en cuanto a universidad nos apropiamos de ese proceso, pero la internacionalización también está en las escuelas, está con los profesores de la educación básica y bueno, estamos trabajando con ello. Tenemos también interlocutoras aquí en Brasil que inclusive ya han producido material teórico sobre el tema, entonces estamos trabajando ahora sobre las prácticas. Y finalmente, cómo migrantes y refugiados están en nuestras universidades y si hablamos de internacionalización en casa, aquí la tenemos y bueno, cómo realmente aprovechamos esas experiencias también muy valiosas que según un diagnóstico y un movimiento inicial que estamos realizando, esos migrantes y refugiados muchas veces están perdidos en nuestras universidades, no perdidos en el sentido de localización, pero sí no le damos realmente el valor y el lugar que merecen para intercambiar esa experiencia intercultural e internacional. Voy a parar por aquí, muchísimas gracias y me quedo a disposición para preguntas y comentarios.
Gracias, Julieta, por esta tão inspiradora charla. E agora vou passar para André.
Hello? Well, good. Can you hear me? Perfect. Good. So, good morning. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. So, Fernanda, Werner, it's really great to be a part of this week. And in particular, I'd like to congratulate you on the initiative to open the parallel sessions. I think these are especially important to recognize the value of internationalization in a university instead of just a bunch of guys coming here and saying stuff. So to learn from the experiences of everyone who has done something and has done something differently, I think it's really, really inspiring. And today, I'm going to follow up a little bit of what I presented last night, discussing the changing landscape of internationalization. So we all know that to be international today, it's quite a different thing from what it was 5 years ago. So the world is changing and it's changing fast, and we need to adapt. And so I'm going to bring a few reflections on that. Okay, so to get started, uh, let's just contextualize a little bit the internationalization of research. So we know it's increasingly seen as vital to advancing science, technology, and innovation in a globalized world. I'm going to focus more on the research side of the internationalization because is the area where I operate, not as much in the education part. And in the context of countries like Brazil, internationalization is crucial for integrating into the global research landscape and addressing local and global challenges. So a good example of the need for that integration comes from open science. So what's happening in the global environment, especially in the global north, is a movement away from transformative agreements. So what happened in open science? A few years ago, there was a determination that we are going to go open. And then there was a push for the so-called gold journals, which are kind of a diminished version of our own diamond journals that we have very much in all of Latin America, not only with Cielo, but so the average cost of an article processing charge in a journal indexed by Web of Science Scopus is around $2,500. So it's a lot of money. If you consider, for example, that a PhD stipend here in Brazil, it's around $500, $600 a month. So how many people you can have in your research workforce if you don't have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars a year on APCs? So this movement has been happening, but then the Global North got a little bit pissed off because the idea was they created agreements with the publishers to transform. That's why they're called transformed agreements. So the idea was to transform the system into open with the publishers helping out. But the publishers actually started to double dip. So basically, I charge people to publish and I charge people to read. So it became the paradise. And the Global North got pissed off and they said, okay, we're not doing that anymore. So now they're starting to implement what's called Plan S 2.0 that promotes Diamond to an extent, but mostly that pushes for preprints. So preprinting, open peer review, open curation in models such as eLife does. And this is great. And they said, we don't want transformative agreements anymore. So no more transformative agreements. The ones that are in place expire in 27, and they are not going to be renewed. So we're going to move forward without the publishers. What Brazil is doing right now? Negotiating transformative agreements. So that's why it's important to be at the table when the global discussions are taking place. Because else, the world is already doing something else. And Brazil now, 5 to 10 years late, is starting to negotiate transformative agreements. That's the importance of internationalization, and not only in education, not only in research, but in policy as well. So this is an important thing. So that's why we have to be at the table, and it's relevant. So we have also the idea of a growing interdependency in scientific production due to shared resources, knowledge, and expertise. So this is another reason why it is really relevant for us to move that in that direction. And then you think about some key forms of internationalization. So we all know that, just to create kind of a base for our discussion, we know that we can internationalize through co-authorship. So we write stuff together. We can be anywhere in the world today, and then we co-write a paper, a report, or a project, or things like that. We have internationalization through mobility programs. So exchange programs for students, researchers, professors. So it's about going someplace or hosting somebody that's coming to visit you. That's also a big challenge and a big responsibility. Research networks. So we can create formal partnerships between institutions, and that usually makes things a bit easier. So I mentioned yesterday that I'm part, well, your computer is off. Seu computador está fora do... Caiu a internet do computador aí. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, hopefully we can move forward. I was mentioning that I'm part of the Research on Research Institute. That's a group of around 30 institutions, 20 of them research councils and funding agencies from more than 20 countries. And this type of formal partnership, it's really interesting. What happens is you have a bunch of funders that fund the project, and they throw the money in the same basket. And so each one of them contribute to the project to the extent of their involvement. And then there's a council of funders, of research councils, and of researchers. And we decide what we're going to do with the money, what type of research we're going to do, what type of project we're going to implement. And then we organize these projects on an international basis. So we always have at least half a dozen funders involved in any project, and you have researchers based all over the place. So I'm a little bit tired today because today I had a meeting at 4 in the morning. And I could not cancel that meeting or reschedule the meeting, considering that I'm in Brazil on a different time frame, because in this meeting there were people from New Zealand, from Australia, from California, from Boston, from all over Europe, from South Africa. It's all in a project. So we all suffer together, but we get stuff done together. So this is an important thing. And it's much easier when you have a network, a formal partnership. It's different when you, like, let's do something together. Yeah, it seems there's an issue with the internet. Okay, so discussing what was there while it reloads. Institutional agreements, also important, bilateral or multilateral collaborations between universities or research bodies. So that's also something relevant to discuss. Let me see how it's going there. Se tiver cabo, eu posso apresentar do meu computador. Okay, so while he tries to connect there, moving forward, talking about 4 main benefits of internationalization. So we have basically 4 things that we all accept somehow to be true. So first, we internationalize for higher impact and visibility. Second, because we can have access to data and infrastructure. Third, it's about capacity building. It's about being outside of your own box so you can learn stuff from another box and expand your own, okay? And then it's about building global networks. And what I mean that when I say that things are changing in some aspects, is because of the way some areas are being able to operate. So it's completely different to be international when you are in Brazil, when you are in the US, or when you are in Europe, or when you are in China. The realities are completely different. So to be in Europe, it's extremely international. So I'm at the department where we are like 50, 60 researchers. From 18 different countries. So it's based in the Netherlands, but I almost never get the opportunity to speak Dutch, and I work so hard to learn it. But the problem is there's always some people in the room that are not Dutch and don't care about learning Dutch. And it's normal. And then there's another thing. We don't know how to say things in Dutch. And when I say we, it's not me, the Brazilian guy. It's the Dutch people, because they write in English, they research in English, they interact in English. So sometimes they've been like, how the hell do I say that in Dutch? They don't know. And that's one of realities of internationalization. Internationalization is to have an opportunity, for example, to take the train in the morning in the Netherlands and go to a meeting in Belgium or in Paris, and go back home in the evening. So it's really easy. How do you do that in Brazil? How do you do that in Brazil? You don't. So for you to go from Santa Catarina to São Paulo or to Brasilia, it's like internationalizing if you are in Europe. So it's very easy for them to say, oh, we're very international. You're not. Yeah, pay attention to reality. So this is something that it's very relevant in terms of what you can do. There are benefits, yes, there are benefits of the internationalization, but there are also the realities that you need to take. So for example, the US, they are international, but they're not really that international if you think about it. So the biggest internationalization structure that they have in the US is that they attract brains. And they have a special visa for that, and they have special benefits for that, and more than half their PhD workforce is foreign-born. So that's their business. We throw money at you, and you want to be our friend. So when you see most of the internationalization and the collaboration that comes from the United States, it comes from that. People want to go there, and they allow people to go there, and they even then they charge a lot of money for them to go there, but they benefit from this, and things are changing in that aspect as well. So I mentioned higher impact and visibility, access capacity building and building global networks. But let's question a little bit some of these things. For example, this is something I showed yesterday. It's a collaboration profile of countries in the Montevideo group. I used the Scopus database for that. On the left, you have the number of papers in this collection for each country. And on the right, you have the percentage of those publications that are in international collaboration, national collaboration, or no collaboration at all. Okay. When you look at that, you see the differences in Latin America. You see a lot of interesting effects, such as it's much easier for Bolivia to collaborate with Chile or Argentina, because like it happens with me in the Netherlands, that if I trip, I fall in Belgium, they are very closer together. So, and they speak the same language. So it's easier to collaborate. And also, there are complex dimensions that we need to account for. So one of the things I mentioned yesterday, I think it's really relevant. When you think about countries like Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay, with high levels of internationalization, does it mean that their research system is so mature and so high quality that everybody wants to collaborate with them? Or does it mean that they still have a level of dependency, like Brazil had decades ago? So CAPES was created in the 1950s with a weird name of Coordination for Perfecting Higher Education Personnel. And basically, the idea was we need to build capacity. We get people, we send them abroad, they learn, they come back. I had a boss at CAPES years ago. She was evaluation director, Rita Barata. She's in public health, and she was a visiting professor at the University of Buenos Aires. She was the only PhD in the faculty. All the professors did not have PhDs when she started. And that was the reality. In Brazil, we had fights at the council to get programs approved, accredited, because there was one person in the proposed faculty without a PhD. So there was a specific case. It was an interesting program on education. It's about indigenous education. And great proposal, were around 20 professors in the program, but one of them had only a master's. And the area rejected because you cannot have, it was a professional master's. It was not a PhD program. It was not a doctoral program. It's a professional master. No, we cannot have a master as a faculty member. In detail, that master had 20 years experience working for FUNAI. So it made a lot of sense. Of course, the council reverted the position of the committee and said, no, this is approved. That can't happen. But we see that in Brazil. You need to have a PhD to be a part of things. That's not the case in most of the neighboring countries. So we need to keep those things in mind. And then you have the benefits of international collaboration. I also showed this yesterday. This is an analysis for the Netherlands. Oh. The slides there, you just change the camera. Yeah. So this analysis for the Netherlands, where we have the PP top 10% indicator, which means the percentage of publications among the 10% more cited. The baseline is 10%. You see that for the Netherlands is 17, and you see that for every country in that map, the number grows. So yeah, it matches that collaborating internationally helps. What we have to reflect is internationalization is a process with a selection bias. So that growth is not a direct result of internationalization. There's a combination of the benefits of internationalization, but the fact that the people that are collaborating internationally are being selected from a larger group. So they already would have higher impact than the average. So we always need to keep that in mind, because we don't want people saying that 1 + 1 = 2. We are in a complex environment, and to conduct policy in a complex environment is not easy when people think things are simple. But then, so we know it's beneficial, and when you look, so that map shows the results for the Netherlands, that matrix shows for everyone in this list. So we have countries from the Coimbra group and the Montevideo group, and what we see here is the collaboration with the countries in the Montevideo group, including Brazil. And you see that for Brazil, when you look at Brazil, it's 6.6%. So basically that means that that number that for the Netherlands is 17%, for Brazil is 6.6%. But when Brazil collaborates with Argentina, it goes to 10.7, Bolivia 14.9, and so on. So we have gains, and they change. So some are very high, some are not really that significant. So we see, for example, that for the Netherlands, it's the 21% that I mentioned before. Norway gets close to that. Poland's 19%. Portugal is 11%. So one of the reasons why impact with collaboration with Portugal tends to be smaller is because we do a lot of stuff with Portugal. And some of the stuff is not good. Why? Because we do it because of the language. So I lived that at CAPES during the Science Without Borders, the whole idea that people go to Portugal because the only place they can go. So it doesn't mean that the country, Portugal is like this. So Portugal is not excellent in everything. So if you go to Portugal to collaborate in a field that Portugal does not excel, you're not going to excel. So, but you go because you speak the language. So that tends to be a problem. So you need to have focus. There are very interesting areas of collaboration with Portugal that generate good effects, but when you aggregate the effects, they disappear. And this is what I mentioned when you start looking, for example, at the level of the university, and you see the Federal University of Santa Catarina in the middle there, you see a change in variation. So what does it mean for Brazil to collaborate with some countries? It's not the same as a specific institution to collaborate with those countries. So for Portugal, the results about the same, but for Hungary, for example, it goes to 24%. And it's interesting that it goes 17 with Bolivia, and so you have the benefit that it's there. So we know this still is the case, that internationalization can help you boost, but you have to know what you're looking for when you do the analysis. And then this is a weird screen. This is actually the code that I wrote to build that table. And the reason I'm showing this, and that is the table with the results and the calculations that I used to create that visualization. And I'm showing this because I'm talking about the second part, access to data and infrastructures. CWTS, where I am, one of the highest, most important, valuable assets of CWTS historically in the past 3-4 decades has been its database. We have a lot of stuff there. So we have in-house versions of Scopus, of Web of Science, of ORCID, of everything you can think of. Open databases, closed databases, Overtone, that's a new database with policy documents and things like that. So everybody always, when they thought about, oh, CWTS, Leiden, databases, it's paradise. And it is. So that was really something incredible, but that's not that incredible anymore. First thing, I no longer need to be there. 6 years ago, I needed to be there. So I could only use the CWTS server if I was sitting at a CWTS computer. I made that analysis from a hotel room, accessing remotely the database. So today I can access that database from anywhere. So if someone goes and spends a research period with us and gets a CWTS account, that access remains after the person leaves. So that's a benefit of internationalization, but it no longer justifies the need for mobility. I don't need to go there to do something. I need to have access to what is there, because I'm actually just going to sit behind my computer and bang my head until the code works. So that's how things are done. And then there's another issue about different resources. So this is something that we're building in partnership with the University of Campinas. And it's something that we're calling the multiversity. So it's a combination of different data sets that we can use together to answer research questions and policy questions that are relevant. So it's about getting the databases that are closed and that you need a system and that you need a multi-million-dollar computer to run, and then you put it on an open infrastructure. So this is Google BigQuery. Google BigQuery is kind of free because it's very cheap. You open an account, you get $300 of credit to use it, and you never spend it. Unless you are like a big data center and so on, usually it's nearly free to have something like this. And it's amazing. So one thing that I'm doing, I'm part of a committee at CAPES that is working on a book for the contributions of Brazilian science to the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a book that's being prepared to be launched just before the COP30 next year in Belém. And one of my jobs is to map the contribution of graduate education to the different SDGs. And I have to map that with an algorithm. And so what I did, because I wanted to have replicability, so I didn't use the Sucupira database. I used the open data copies, and I downloaded the tables with thesis, dissertations, abstracts, and so on. And I built like a huge code in R with some well-established mapping algorithms, translated the algorithms to Portuguese so I could run the English part in the abstract, the Portuguese part in the resumo. And then I started running. I ran SDG 1 for 10 years, about 800,000 theses and dissertations. It took 7 hours. And then I went and ran 2, and it took a little bit more, and then 3 took a couple of days, and 4, my computer almost like became a fireplace. And I said, no, I need to wait till winter in the Netherlands so I can run this from the backyard, because there was no way. And I said, no, I need to rethink that. And I said, well, I was doing that in R, which is usually pretty efficient. But I said, I'm going to do this here. So I pretty much transformed the CAPES database of theses and dissertations into a relational database that's already publicly available. So instead of having to have 10 gigabytes of Excel spreadsheets in your computer, you have a relational database already available, publicly available. And I had to rewrite the whole thing in SQL, so I could do that. But the difference is that that first one that took 7 hours to run, it took 30 seconds. And it cost like 25 cents to do that. So it's a different reality. The idea that you need to have access to data, to infrastructures, it's no longer that much of a case. Of course, in an area such as engineering, that is still a big thing because you still depend on some expensive, big machines, hard to maintain, and things like that. But in many fields, we're having a blast in terms of possibilities. And I think this is a little bit of the future. For capacity building, so the picture kind of says everything. So we have a completely different perspective in that sense. So the pandemic technology, as I call it, it's breaking down the barriers. So it was really annoying when the pandemic started and nothing worked. And today we don't work because we always forget to open our microphones. We always have to do that at least once per meeting. It's been years and we can't learn that. So, but the app still already works, and the quality of the connections are really amazing. So for capacity building, we have at CWTS a traditional summer school. So it's equivalent to 3 European credits. It's 2 full weeks of centimetric training. And the past 2 editions, we had it hybrid. So we have people from all over the world usually attending this. And now we have even more. So we had 20 people in person and 20 people online. And then we have like a big, nice room where you can have a screen just for the cameras of the people. And so we can try to interact a little bit more as if they were there. But we had people this year from Azerbaijan, from Kazakhstan, there. Some people that wanted to attend the course for years, but would never able to secure a visa. So, yeah, it was great that we had in-house of the 20 people, we had people from 16 different countries. It was great. It's very nice that we can have that. But now we can have even more than that. So the mobility also becomes something important. So we have these hybrid models for capacity building. We have this virtual mobility as well, that it's what's happening. You get to work with a lot of people online, and you don't even know where people are from sometimes. I'm going to South Africa for Diamond Summit, and the other day during a meeting, I mentioned, I'm going to promote a workshop there and so on, and somebody said, where is South Africa? I said, Cape Town. I said, I'm from Cape Town. I said, I didn't know that. I thought you were in London or something like that. But it tends to happen this, so it kind of erases borders. And then, I'm passing here, not there, sorry. So it's the hybrid mobility, and finally the focus on digital literacy. So this is still the challenge. People need to have access to technology. People need to have access to a decent internet. It doesn't take a lot, but it takes something. And this is kind of a problem when you're dealing with frontiers and peripheries. So it's the whole idea, for example, that Argentina today struggles to promote its scientific production because it doesn't have money to pay for DOIs, digital object identifiers. They cost $1. And it's absurd that in a system like that, they cannot do this. So it needs to be both an internal thing, in the sense that, don't I really have $1? Because, yeah, I'm paying for the researchers, I'm paying for the time, I'm paying for the institution, I'm spending a lot to conduct the research and produce the research. $1 is not that expensive, so that research is accessible worldwide. But there are also initiatives that are working towards supporting. So I think it's kind of a two-way thing that needs to be added. Okay, and the building global networks. So this is something also important. I remember the first time I sat down with my supervisor when I first arrived in Leiden like 6 years ago. I had a research project and I had a reference list, and he sat with me with the reference list and he went like, he's from here, he's from here, she's from here, she's always here, we're always there, we're going to meet at the conference. Every single one of my references was somebody that was around. That was amazing to me, to have access to the people that I would read and that I would cite, and that were the big names in the field, and that I could sit down with them, especially because I had a very Brazil-oriented research, and I could sit and say, okay, let's talk. I'm going to teach you about Brazil, and I want to recruit you because I want you to get an interest on what we do. So it's something that I was mentioning today. You have to be a little bit of a salesman of what Brazil has to offer, because there are a lot of good things. So I would do that and build these global networks. And this is still a vital part of the whole internationalization thing and the mobility thing. And especially because you see things like this. So this is a mobility study that shows the percentage of insiders in institutions. So we're talking about country here. So you see that in the US and most of Northern Europe, Australia, most people that are inside the higher education institution and university are not originally from there. This is not the same with Latin America and with the southern part of Europe. These are all institutions in the Leiden ranking. That's why there's not a lot in the Latin American part. But we see that some institutions attract a lot of people and retain a lot of people. Some institutions have more trouble to do that. And we can map this because of papers. So we could actually, I would say, already advance in the conclusion of this, because when you look at something like this, so you see a paper, and then you have here, for example, a friend of mine, Nicholas, originally from Valencia, and you see that he started his career there in Valencia. But then he had an affiliation with Georgia Tech in the US, where he went for a research period. And then in the next step, he moved to Delft in the Netherlands, where he did his postdoc. And then he moved to Granada, where he currently is. So usually people can do kind of a footprint of the researcher. So where the affiliations were at each publication, and then you can track the career and the mobility of the researcher. The problem is that with technology, this is disappearing. So I say, I'm a visiting professor at the University of Paraná, and I teach online. So yeah, this semester I had an internationalization class, and I taught it 100% from Leiden. So, and when I publish something with my colleagues there, and I include my Paraná affiliation, it doesn't mean I'm mobile. It doesn't mean I'm going there. I'm still based in Leiden. I still have my affiliation there. Same thing. I'm still at CAPES, and often I also list CAPES as an affiliation, especially when I'm talking policy, because I think it's important to recognize that I'm a little bit of an insider. So it's kind of a disclaimer to recognize my affiliation. But I'm not physically there. So the whole international researcher thing that, oh, it's going from here to there, doesn't really happen anymore. Well, of course, it happens, but it doesn't need to be the case. You can no longer assume that's the case because there are different possibilities for that. So moving towards the end here, this is an interesting system that was developed by a colleague originally from Leiden, and now she's in Austria. Basically, you can map flows. She got the information from papers of all the people using the dimensions database, and she mapped the flow of people across the world. So basically, you can do something, for example, this is for Brazil. You have how many people are going from Brazil to the US, from Brazil, to Brazil, to the UK, from the UK, to France, from France, and you can do that for a combination of countries and see how many people are leaving, how many people are getting in, and you can do kind of a miscellaneous. It's an interesting platform that I recommend you take a look. That it helps understand a little bit this mobility with the restriction that I already made. And then there's the institutional mobility in Brazil. That's also an issue. So if you take a look at this, so this is a map created from mobility between institutions in Brazil. So you see that we change seats. It happens. And in some cases, for you to go, for example, from the University of São Paulo to the University of Pernambuco, it's pretty much like moving from Europe to the US almost. It's far. And usually these changes are life-changing. And they should be a part of that. There's the Brazilian colleague currently on a research period with us in Leiden, actually trying to understand this, the value of national mobility. That's also an important thing, especially when you have a lot of asymmetry in the country. And then just a highlight to conclude, you see here, for example, do all countries benefit in terms of collaboration from their mobile researchers? And that tends to be usually an issue. So we see that if the origin is a high or and an upper middle income country, and you go to a high and upper middle income country, you have kind of 34% chance of continue. If you go to a lower middle and low income country, then it's you tend to have more collaborations. And the opposite when you are from a lower middle or low income country and you go to a high and upper middle income country, it's not always that high. And when you go to the lower, it's not really that high. So the important thing is it takes an effort from our side to make collaborations happen. So usually that's what happens when a researcher from the global south goes to global north, gets there, gets some attention, they leave. If they don't keep active, they disappear into oblivion because other people will go, they have other things to do, and so on. And so for us, that international reference becomes central, but for them, no. So we need to chase them. That's basically the message here. Okay, and just to finish with the challenges, we have funding disparities, we have language barriers, we have inequitable access, we have brain drain, we have reciprocity issues, something that was very discussed yesterday, and capacity gaps. So all these tend to be elements that we need to work around to keep adapting to this new landscape. And with that, we conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, André. A gente pode trazer o Hans novamente para a tela? So our panelists brought important and very inspiring information and elements for reflection on internationalization of higher education on the current panorama. Professor Hans de Witt, he brings context to internationalization as a process, as a phenomenon. He mentions that internationalization cannot be seen as an isolated factor. He also points to internationalization as a competitive force, as a Western paradigm, and he points to the need to promote internationalization strategies that are indeed responsible, that are indeed connected to social needs. Then Julieta explicits inequalities that take place in the international arena of higher education. She brings the concept of another type of internationalization as a very inspiring one, making reference to our intellectual Milton Santos. And then she brings some elements for us to think on internationalization from the South to the South. André Brasil portrays dependencies on the knowledge production landscape with very interesting concrete data that leads us to important reflections. And what I wanted to bring as a reflection to open up for our public is that despite the growing critical discussions and reflections, such as this one on internationalization, we notice that internationalization is still many times perceived in terms of unconditional good, especially in official discourses. We hear all the time that we have to internationalize, but the path to internationalize is already established. So we do not look to internationalization as it is, and we do not promote enough discussions on the reasons to internationalize, what we want with internationalization, and how internationalization can contribute to reducing social inequalities, dependencies, colonialism. So I would like to ask our panelists, but just as general questions for reflection, and then invite our public here to also make questions for them. What would be some of the key elements for university administrators, for policymakers, for scholars, for researchers, to students, to go beyond rhetoric of internationalization and to promote internationalization policies and strategies that are truly more connected to social justice goals, to emancipation, to respect, to the promotion of interculturality, to the decolonization of global imaginaries that are truly, in the case of Brazil and Latin America, from the South to the South, or as Julieta brings, another type of internationalization. So does anyone have a question here, or maybe on YouTube?
I had one, but it's the same as yours.
Okay.
The challenges for administrators was basically what you were asking. So, what is our role shaping the...
So Professor Werner makes a similar questions, specifically in the case for university administrators that have this responsible role related to internationalization. Does anyone else would like to make a question? Okay, so I will invite Professor Hans to bring some reflection on that. He left?
Yes, he mentioned that.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's okay. So Julieta, would you like to make a reflection on that?
Entonces, desafíos, problemáticas. Creo que dentro de la universidad, dentro del ámbito universitario, primero, el primer desafío es cómo nos pensamos en cuanto a una institución con sus actores, ¿no? Ahí mencionaba estudiantes, profesores, gestores, técnicos administrativos. Yo creo que cuando hablamos de la internacionalización comprensiva, de la internacionalización integral, o podemos decir de la internacionalización de cabo a rabo, es desde aquella persona que yo le pregunté, que estaba allá en la entrada de este centro, para que me informara dónde quedaba el auditorio, hasta los grandes investigadores, rector, etcétera. Internacionalización en todos sus... que atraviesa a todas las personas que trabajan dentro de la universidad. Creo que tiene que ver con cómo nos concebimos como una institución fuera de sus muros occidentales, coloniales, eurocéntricos, androcéntricos, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Creo que la universidad necesita ir avanzando así como la sociedad va avanzando, ¿no? La sociedad nos está mostrando una gran heterogeneidad, diversidad, desigualdades, inequidades, como fue comentado aquí. Entonces la universidad necesita ir acompañando eso, ¿no? Ir acompañando esa diversidad presente en la sociedad. ¿Cómo hacerlo? Creo que es un gran desafío. Creo que es un gran desafío y algunos elementos que me parecen necesarios compartiendo con ustedes, pero creo que no hay una respuesta correcta o errada, es desde nuestros lugares, qué es lo que nosotros proponemos en un sentido micro, porque descolonizar la universidad, ¿no? Despatriarcalizar la universidad, en fin, todos esos movimientos que tienen que ver con pensarnos en un sentido contemporáneo, pero también histórico, es algo que también, bueno, hay que hacerlo ya y nos apavora, entonces no lo hacemos porque es un cambio drástico. Creo que cada uno desde nuestro lugar micro, ¿cómo lo hacemos? Miñolo hablaría de la frontera, ¿no? Desde nuestra frontera, desde nuestros entrelugares, desde abajo. Catherine Walsh también nos provocaría pensar desde abajo, ¿no? Desde el sentido social. Fernanda nos provocaba, bueno, la justicia social, ¿cómo estamos más conectados con eso? Bueno, desde abajo. Y en ese desde abajo pensarnos con, por ejemplo, los pueblos originarios, pueblos indígenas, pensarnos con las poblaciones que no están dentro de la universidad, pero que van a estar dentro de la universidad y que van a estar, si están dentro de la universidad, van a ser parte de la internacionalización. Ayer estuve muy atenta, por ejemplo, a la palestra de abertura, ¿no? La conferencia de abertura, cuando se mencionaban algunas cosas que creo que ya estamos en el camino. Cuando CAPES lanza programas que tienen que ver con los caminos afroamericanos, que tienen que ver con conectarnos con las raíces y con ese pasado que nos forma, que nos conforma, creo que estamos camino, que hay algunas cuestiones, pero sobre todo pensarse en ese sentido amplio, heterogéneo, diverso, etcétera, etcétera, creo que es una clave. Como gestión, ¿cómo pensamos esa diversidad cuando lanzamos programas editales? ¿Lanzamos programas y editales solo para quien hable inglés y para quien va a hacer una movilidad para el norte global? ¿O lanzamos editales que contemplen otras lenguas? ¿O que para tener que ir a una movilidad para el norte global no necesite tener un nivel de proficiencia, ¿no? Sino que, bueno, puedo ir con mi nivel. Hay un término que me gusta mucho, que es trabajado por los colegas de letras, del área de letras, que es translinguaging. Que tiene que ver con nos conectar con ese otro que fala diferente, que habla diferente, y que voy a ese encuentro de ese otro en el sentido del otro diferente a mí, y no necesito tener una comprensión espectacular de esa lengua, sino que me puedo comunicar con el otro desde mi nivel básico. Solo necesito una buena voluntad para ir a ese encuentro de ese otro. Entonces, a mí me gusta mucho ese concepto y lo aplico en mi vida también con mis colegas, etc. Entonces, creo que tendría que ver con eso, desde lo micro y pensando ese sentido amplio y diverso de la sociedad, y que la internacionalización y la universidad necesitan acompañar. Y obviamente eso tiene que ver con paradigmas, perspectivas críticas, ¿no? pensarnos en un sentido crítico en general.
Gracias. André.
Prontinho. Trocar para português, já que o Hans não está mais aí a gente faz multilíngua. Bom, o processo da política, da gestão por trás de um processo de internacionalização, ele não é nada fácil. O exemplo do multilinguismo é o principal, porque você não aprende uma língua do dia para o outro. É um processo complicado, é um processo demorado, e o que acaba acontecendo, e marcou muito aquela ideia de que a internacionalização é um privilégio dos privilegiados, dos que já são privilegiados. E, de certa forma, o que a gente vê muitas vezes acontecendo na universidade é que as pessoas elas não acham que elas vão ter uma oportunidade. Elas começam um curso, elas nunca imaginam que elas vão conseguir fazer alguma coisa no exterior, que vão conseguir um congresso, que vão conseguir fazer um sanduíche, ou seja lá o que for, né? Na pós-graduação e na graduação, então, muito menos. O que acontece? As pessoas não têm interesse de estudar, né? Porque é muito difícil, apesar da gente viver num mundo já internacionalizado, globalizado, com acesso a um monte de coisa, aprender idioma dá trabalho, né? E as pessoas tentam aprender e muitas vezes não conseguem, não acham motivação. Tem tanta coisa para a gente fazer na nossa vida, a gente não sabe se a gente vai usar. Estava falando com um colega na CAPES, que terminou o doutorado dele há uns 10 anos e está estudando a possibilidade de fazer um pós-doc comigo na Holanda. Ele falou, não, eu vou fazer um plano de 2 anos porque eu preciso reaprender inglês, porque eu não uso. E o cara trabalha na CAPES e trabalhava na diretoria de relações internacionais. Ele falava, eu ficava 1 ano sem falar inglês, mole. Né? Então, qual a motivação das pessoas de aprenderem? Né? Essa é uma realidade do país. É muito caro você ir para uma viagem no exterior. Você tem milhões de opções de turismo no próprio Brasil, que não precisaria ir para o exterior. Né? Então, falta motivação. E, às vezes, o papel da universidade é deixar bem claro, desde o início, que aqui tem uma oportunidade e essa oportunidade ela é ampla, ela é acessível para todo mundo. O que você precisa fazer para você usufruir dessa oportunidade quando ela chegar? Né? Porque não adianta chegar, agora abriu o edital, vou aprender inglês no final de semana para fazer a prova na segunda-feira. Né? E aí não é só passar no teste, porque isso é uma coisa triste que eu já vi acontecer. O pessoal vai lá fora e não aproveita, porque não tem o domínio do idioma. Aí não se sente confiante para explorar, porque, por exemplo, quando alguém vai trabalhar comigo, a primeira coisa que eu vou fazer é ver que tipo de interesse a pessoa pode ter e vou tentar acionar as redes de contato. E vou dizer, vai. Né? Então, esse cara mesmo lá da CAPES, ele está fazendo um estudo sobre extensão universitária aplicada na pós-graduação. Né? Como a pós-graduação pode começar a trabalhar o conceito de extensão. E eu falei, não, eu conheço um monte de gente Europa fora que vai poder te explicar como é que eles estão fazendo. Então, você vai para lá, eu te passo os contatos e você vai visitar essas pessoas. Então, vai conhecer, vai ver na prática e tudo mais. A pessoa tem que ter o inglês, senão não vai. E já aconteceu de gente ir para lá, eu falo, você vai falar com fulano, ciclano e beltrano, mas toda vez que falava com fulano, ciclano e beltrano, eu tinha que estar na sala porque eu tinha que servir de intérprete. Né? E a pessoa acaba não aproveitando, esconde dentro do quarto de hotel do Airbnb, né? E fica lendo artigo e, às vezes, fazendo resumo de literatura. Não é para isso que você veio para cá. Você veio para dar cara a tapa. Né? Então, essa coisa do idioma é importante. Em conferência, você vê muito isso. Né? Os chineses, por exemplo, que tradicionalmente têm bastante dificuldade de falar inglês, você vê um esvaziamento nas sessões que são organizadas com a apresentação de pessoal da China. E eu vi uma na última conferência que o cara saiu da sala assim, e falou assim, não dá. Já é um negócio complicado de você entender. Se você não consegue nem entender a língua direito que o cara está falando, quanto mais o conteúdo. Então não dá. O seu cérebro tem um limite de esforço. Eu falei, faz sentido, né? Não é porque você não está querendo ser tolerante, ou não está querendo aceitar, ou você não está com uma posição, mas se realmente você não consegue decifrar o que está sendo dito, é complicado. Então, essa coisa de mostrar lá no fim do túnel quais são as oportunidades e de começar a criar caminhos para que as pessoas que estão entrando lá possam seguir, seja para o desenvolvimento da língua, seja para o desenvolvimento de algum outro tipo de habilidade que vá ser importante, né? Eu acho que isso é essencial.
Vou aproveitar a fala do professor André, assim, e trazer um elemento adicional, talvez, né, que eu acho que tem essa questão da motivação pessoal, né? Ela é um elemento muito importante para quem deseja alcançar outros locais, né? Estar em outros lugares e alcançar outros patamares, mas também reforçar a importância de uma mudança de paradigma, porque muitas pessoas que hoje integram a universidade acham que a internacionalização não é para elas. Elas não conseguem nem chegar na questão da motivação, porque, historicamente, elas foram criadas e estar na universidade já é algo assim que talvez nem tivessem imaginado, que os pais daquela pessoa nem tivessem imaginado. Então, é muito difícil também você ter motivação para algo que você acha que não é seu, né? Então, daí a importância de nós, como gestores, né, de educação internacional, pensarmos em formas de incluir essas pessoas, mas não incluir numa via de mão única, no sentido de que vocês têm que se adaptar ao nosso contexto, de que internacionalização é isso, mas de fazê-las se identificar, né, com aquilo, se enxergarem naquilo, enxergarem a sua história naquilo, e de entenderem que não há um único caminho para internacionalizar, né, que elas podem realmente fazer isso a partir da sua própria história, né, de vida. Nós temos que pensar isso, sobretudo, hoje, porque a nossa universidade pública brasileira ela já não é mais a mesma, né? Os públicos que estão aqui, eles não são mais os mesmos, né? Hoje a universidade é um retrato muito mais fiel, digamos assim, da sociedade brasileira, então é importante que se pense em internacionalização nesses termos também. Só para complementar assim, a questão, além da motivação pessoal, que é muito importante, né? Sim, Werner.
Obrigado, Fernanda. Só para me apresentar, sou Werner Kraus Jr., pró-reitor de pós-graduação da universidade. E, bom, bastante, vamos dizer assim, aprendiz nos temas mais intrincados da internacionalização. E eu sabia que essa semana, para mim, seria uma semana de intenso aprendizado, e, de fato, está sendo, desde ontem já, e hoje aqui mais ainda, né? Então, refletindo alguma coisa nessa questão do desafio para os gestores universitários, eu creio que o professor Hans, no fim da fala dele, quando colocou aquela problemática de um retrocesso geopolítico aí na questão da globalização, que, por coincidência, ele falava que nos anos 90 havia uma visão otimista em relação à internacionalização da universidade, e a gente pode associar, embora ele não tenha dito isso, a todo um clima de globalização econômica que havia, todo um discurso pela globalização, e agora a gente vê os nacionalistas, cinicamente, claro, né, enfim, ideologicamente, apenas manipulando opiniões, mas, enfim, argumentando contra essa globalização e pelo nacionalismo. E aí, com isso, trazendo desafios importantes para as universidades. E ele trouxe a palavra autonomia universitária. E, no âmbito da autonomia universitária, a gente resistir, enquanto universidades, a esse movimento nacionalista de sectário. E aí me vem a questão seguinte, quer dizer, nós, como gestores, administradores, enfim, temos uma enorme oportunidade, aí na pós-graduação, muito mais que na graduação, em mudar os códigos, em mudar os regramentos. E saúdo a chegada da nossa sessão de amanhã, né, convido a todos, inclusive, que vai discutir justamente resolução para a internacionalização da Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina e também a inserção do que a gente está fazendo em termos de pensar e refletir a internacionalização no PDI, no Plano de Desenvolvimento Institucional da própria instituição. Agora, a gente tem que ser, então, ousado para pensar que nós temos que fomentar uma cultura de universidade cosmopolita, mesmo sem ter recurso, mesmo com todos os desafios colocados pelo André aqui, muito bem sumarizados, e talvez a nossa linha de ação seja, de fato, poder aproveitar todas as oportunidades do barateamento trazido pela tecnologia. Reconheço o problema da exclusão tecnológica, mas também reconheço o enorme potencial de inclusão trazido pelas tecnologias. Eu, como engenheiro, claro, não poderia deixar de ter essa esperança e essa fé, engenheiro de automação ainda por cima, né? Mas eu creio que é nisso, quer dizer, a nossa dimensão como gestor, mudar os regramentos, mudar os regulamentos, tanto em nível local como em nível nacional. E a gente tem visto coisas muito legais. Por exemplo, nós aqui na pós-graduação instituímos as redes colaborativas de programas da UFSC. Isso é um negócio que a CAPES, por exemplo, não tem nada para dizer que, olha, se uma universidade tem uma rede colaborativa em torno de um tema, então as bolsas dos programas dessa rede, o custeio dos programas dessa rede podem ser compartilhados com todos da rede. Isso não tem. Mas é algo que eu sei que, se a gente for dialogar na CAPES, em 6 meses a gente sai com uma portaria implementando. Então, essa facilidade que a gente tem de fazer mudanças institucionais a partir da gestão universitária me parece um caminho bastante interessante para trazer e fincar essa cultura cosmopolita na universidade, na qual, mesmo quem não faça mobilidade, se sinta já cidadão cosmopolita e participante dessa aldeia global, né, que um dia se sonhou a respeito. Tá? Era isso. Obrigado.
Obrigada, Werner. Mais alguma... Sim, por favor.
Bom dia a todos. Meu nome é Thaís, eu sou coordenadora, coordenadora do programa de pós-graduação em farmácia. E, na verdade, era só um comentário, porque eu sou geralmente uma pessoa bem otimista, né? E eu entendo, quando a Julieta falou sobre a questão... Até esqueci o termo que você usou, Julieta, no teu último comentário, agora da pergunta da Fernanda. Essa questão da língua, ela dessa proficiência, talvez essa proficiência, e aí pensando já nas mudanças de regulamentação, de exigências, de proficiência e tudo mais, ela deva vir como uma consequência da internacionalização, não como uma exigência para. Né? E aí eu digo que eu sou otimista porque eu consigo visualizar que essa questão da língua, talvez com dispositivos de tradução em tempo real, não só nos eventos, mas nas conversas que as pessoas têm, né? Para que a língua ela não seja a maior barreira para isso. Né? Porque eu concordo totalmente com o André, as pessoas elas travam, elas não vão para fazer os contatos, né? E elas não se acham capazes de fazer esse contato, por mais conhecimento que elas tenham. Então, o que eu vejo de futuro é realmente que essa proficiência ela seja consequência da internacionalização. Só que, para isso, a gente precisa mudar os regramentos, né? Senão, a gente não dá oportunidade para que isso aconteça. E aí a gente abre possibilidade para multilínguas, inclusive falando dos povos originários e tudo mais. Né? Então, eu espero que isso possa acontecer o mais rapidamente possível, porque não é possível, com tanta inteligência artificial que a gente tem, que a gente não consiga fazer isso, né? Esse acesso da internacionalização, para que as coisas realmente aconteçam. Né? Então, parabéns pela mesa, foi incrível, aprendi bastante. Obrigada.
Mais alguma colocação? Bom, acho que encerramos, então, a nossa mesa aqui. Agradecemos novamente a presença de todas e todos. Aprendi muito também com meus colegas, então, obrigada. Obrigada por terem vindo. Obrigada também ao professor Hans, que precisou sair antes. Na verdade, ele tinha me avisado, mas a gente se estendeu aqui um pouquinho, mas está tudo bem. Que bom que ele pôde trazer esse histórico, né, da internacionalização, que é importante. Muito obrigada a todos. E só convidá-los, né, para acompanharem a programação da Semana Internacional. Hoje à tarde nós temos um painel que faz parte também da organização muito importante, às 16 horas, neste mesmo local, que é para discutir sobre o novo programa de internacionalização da CAPES, o CAPES Global. Nós vamos ter aqui o professor Rui Opperman, diretor de Relações Internacionais da CAPES, além de diversas outras atividades que estão lá na programação. Obrigada.